The Golf Laboratories robot test is a brutal place for excuses. When they strapped a swing robot onto the same driver head and swapped only the shaft, the difference in ball speed was over 4 miles per hour. That is not a manufacturing tolerance. That is the difference between a ball that lands on the fringe and one that rolls past the 150-yard marker. The head did not change. The club face did not get hotter. The shaft was the only variable, and it cost the test 8 yards of carry before the ball ever bounced. If you have been playing the same shaft you bought in your 50s, you are swinging a relic designed for a younger, faster, stronger body. The problem is not that your swing slowed down. The problem is that your equipment was never calibrated for the swing you have today. A shaft that was too stiff at 58 becomes a board at 64. A flex point that launched the ball perfectly a decade ago now fights your natural release, bleeding spin, and lowering your apex until every drive lands short and rolls dead. The first profile is the counterintuitive one, and it breaks everything you think you know about flex. Most players over 60 reach for a senior flex shaft because they believe their swing speed dropped below the threshold for regular. But a 2023 study by True Spec Golf, published in their annual fitting report, found that nearly 60% of golfers over 60 were actually fit into a regular flex when measured on a TrackMan. The reason was not swing speed, it was transition. The senior flex shaft, with its softer tip and lower overall stiffness, actually increased dynamic loft for players with a smooth, gradual transition, sending the ball higher but robbing it of penetrating flight. The regular flex shaft, when paired with the same head, dropped the launch angle by 2 degrees and increased ball speed by nearly 2 miles per hour because the tip did not collapse at impact. That is the first lesson. Your flex is not a function of your age. It is a function of how you load the club. If you have a smooth backswing and a patient transition, a regular flex shaft is almost certainly faster than a senior flex, even if your swing speed hovers in the mid-80s. The softer shaft may feel easier to swing, but it is costing you the compression that turns a good strike into a great one. The numbers do not lie. A shaft that bends too much at impact bleeds energy. A shaft that matches your loading pattern stores it and releases it into the ball. Think about that number for a second, nearly 2 miles per hour of ball speed from changing flex, not age. If that data point made you reconsider your own setup, there are more hidden studies like it waiting in the database. Subscribe so you do not miss the next breakdown of what the fitting industry does not want you to know. And in the comments, type regular. If you are now second-guessing that senior flex shaft you are about to buy. The second profile flips the assumption about weight. Every golfer over 60 has been told at some point that lighter shafts are better because they are easier to swing faster. That is true in theory, and false in practice for a specific type of player. If you have ever bought a lightweight shaft, felt like you were swinging a feather, and watched your dispersion patterns widen until you could not find the fairway, you know the quiet frustration of a change that made everything worse. My Golf Spy conducted an independent test in 2022 comparing shafts at 60 grams, 50 grams, and 40 grams using the same club head and the same golfer. The 60-gram shaft produced the tightest dispersion by a margin of over 6 feet. The 40-gram shaft generated the highest club head speed by nearly 2 miles per hour, but the ball landed in a circle that was almost 10 feet wider. The trade-off between speed and control is not worth it for the vast majority of players over 60. The added speed from a lighter shaft does not translate to better scores if your misses turn a 3-yard deviation into a 9-yard one. There is a physiological reason for this. As we age, the proprioceptive feedback from the club diminishes. A lighter shaft reduces the amount of sensory information your brain receives about the club head position during the swing. You are essentially swinging blind, relying on feel that is no longer there. A shaft that weighs between 60 and 65 grams restores that feedback, giving your hands and wrists a clearer signal about where the club head is, especially in the transition and the first half of the downswing. The third profile is the one most fitters get wrong, and it is the reason so many golfers over 60 give up on equipment changes altogether. It is about kick point, or more precisely, the longitudinal stiffness profile of the shaft, where it bends and how it releases. The conventional wisdom says that a low kick point helps launch the ball higher, which is what slower swinging players need. But that advice was built for 25-year-olds with fast tempos and late releases. For a 60-plus golfer with a moderate tempo and a slightly early release, a low kick point often produces too much spin, turning a drive into a knuckleball that falls out of the sky. Golf Digest featured a fitting case study in their 2022 equipment issue that followed a 63-year-old golfer who had been battling a ballooning ball flight for 3 seasons. His launch angle was healthy at 14 degrees, but his spin rate was over 3,200 RPM. The fitters dropped his kick point from low to mid, kept his loft the same, and watched the spin drop to 2,400 RPM. His carry distance increased by 7 yards and his total distance by 12, because the ball was finally penetrating through the air instead of climbing and stalling. If you have ever watched your drive climb beautifully, hang for a moment, and then drop short of the expected landing area, you have experienced the low kick point trap. The mid-kick point shaft is the silent fix. It maintains launch while controlling spin, and it does not fight your natural release the way a high kick point shaft would. It is the Goldilocks option that almost nobody talks about because it is not the flashy choice. But it is the one that consistently adds yards for the recreational golfer over 60. That case study is exactly the kind of controlled data that changes rounds, not just budgets. If you want to see more fitting walkthroughs that cut through the marketing noise, subscribe to Follow the Numbers, not the hype. And in the comments, write mid-kick if you have ever watched a drive stall and fall short of where you expected it to land. The fourth profile is the wild card, and it is the one I want you to remember when you walk into the fitting studio next week. It is a counterbalance shaft, and it changes everything about how you sequence your swing. Counterbalance shafts are heavier in the butt end, sometimes by as much as 30 grams, which moves the balance point closer to your hands. That shift does 2 things. It makes the club feel lighter at the head during the swing, which helps you maintain club head speed without feeling like you are swinging harder. And it slows down your transition, subtly encouraging a smoother, more rhythmic move at the top. Stop here for a moment. Tell me in the comments which profile surprised you so far. Was it the flex mismatch, the weight trade-off, or the spin trap? I want to know which one matches your diagnosis. If this resonates with you, there's a lot more where this came from. Link in the description and pinned comment. That counterbalance data came from a controlled trial, not a manufacturer's claim. I bring studies like that to every video because the truth is in the numbers, not the ads. Subscribe to keep seeing the tests the industry hopes you will ignore. And in the comments, type counterbalance. If the idea of a weight shift improving your timing makes you want to try it. A 2021 study published by the American Society of Golf Professionals followed 20 golfers over 60 who switched to counterbalance shafts. The average increase in club head speed was 1.8 miles per hour, and the average improvement in strike location consistency was measured at 3 millimeters centerward on the club face. That is not a marketing claim. That is a measured outcome from a controlled trial. A shift of 3 millimeters centerward on the face of a driver translates to roughly 100 RPM of spin reduction and a slightly higher launch angle. Combine those 2 effects, and you get a ball that carries longer and rolls farther. The counterbalance shaft works because it changes the timing of your release. The extra weight near your hands delays the release of the club head, just enough to keep the face square through impact for longer. For a golfer whose release has started to get a little early, that delay is worth yards. It is not magic. It is physics applied to the specific problem of a swing that has slowed naturally. Now, here is the uncomfortable truth that ties all 4 of these profiles together. If you have been buying a new driver head every 2 years for the last decade but never changed your shaft, you have left somewhere between 10 and 15 yards on the counter. The head is allowed to be the same. The shaft is the part of the club that actually interfaces with your swing. It is the spring that stores and releases your energy. And if that spring does not match your current mechanics, you are playing with a broken tool, no matter how many watts of forgiveness the manufacturer promised. Think about that. 10 to 15 yards you left on the counter because you never questioned the shaft. If that number stings, subscribe so you stop leaving yards behind on every round. And in the comments, write 10 yards if you are now counting how many times you have bought a new head instead of a new shaft. Which of these 4 shafts did you already dismiss without trying? Comment your moment. When did you realize the shaft may be the culprit, not your swing? A member at TPC Sawgrass, a 66-year-old retired engineer who had dropped from a 12 handicap to an 18 over 5 seasons, switched from a standard 60-gram regular flex shaft with a low kick point to a 65-gram regular flex shaft with a mid kick point, and added counterbalance. He made no other change to his club. He did not buy a new driver. He did not adjust his loft. He simply swapped the shaft. In his first round with the new setup, he drove the green on a 300-yard par 4 that he had not reached in 3 years. He finished the season at a 14 handicap and told the fitter he had gotten his distance back without chasing a new head. You can do the same thing for under $150. A new driver head costs $600. A new shaft installed costs between $150 and $250, depending on the brand and the fitter. The return on investment is not even close. A shaft change costs a third of a head and delivers measurable gains in speed, dispersion, and strike consistency. The head is a marketing problem. The shaft is a physics problem, and physics does not care about your budget. Imagine the sound of your drive landing 15 yards past your usual marker, rolling out another 10, and settling on a piece of fairway you have not seen in years. You did not buy a $600 driver. You bought a $150 shaft and the willingness to be honest about your swing. That is what these 4 profiles offer, a way back to the distance you thought you lost forever, for a fraction of the cost. Which one are you going to try first? Drop your answer below. And when you walk into the fitting bay next time, remember that the man holding the club is more important than the club itself. The shaft is the connection between the two. If that connection is wrong, everything else is noise. These 4 profiles are your starting point. Pick the one that matches your symptom and get ready to hit a ball that sounds different when it leaves the face.